So I guess I also look at, what's the possibility of doing a percentage? Meaning that if you pick a time that they have to work X amount of hours, days, years, or whatever, and they would have to repay, because it basically says, I mean, what I'm reading, it, whatever it is, if you don't meet that, you're gonna have to repay the whole amount, but I'm looking at, so what if you get into where you work, let's just say it's a year, and you end up, for whatever reason, things don't work out, whatever, and you need to give your resignation after 9 months. So would they have, again, then would they have to pay back a quarter of it as compared to all of it?
Yeah, what we try to do here is create certainty for management, staff, and planning, if that makes sense. Because we feel that Cliff provides us certainty. And whoever the employee is likely would communicate that, okay, after this amount of time, we are gonna be done, so we can plan for the replacement. We do have a full repayment with tuition and lineman apprenticeship. We don't have a tier, but you could create a tier where 100% repayment if you don't come back, and that decreases by 10% for every 2 weeks of work, or for every week of work, or 5% with every week work. So if you know you're here 10 weeks, times 5%, after 10 weeks you only owe 50%, or whatever the board wanted to tier that to.
So here's my another question. So in this whole process, are we looking to finalize it tonight? Or are
No.
we trying to get just input and see where everything falls again? Because again, one of our board members is not here.
I would like all input given tonight so that we can, hey, tweak that second and third bullet, tweak how not restricted is worded, you know, give us percentages that we can target. I still would like staff, you know, especially the office staff. You know, okay, this is what the board's targeting. I mean, how concerned are we that 12 weeks might be far too much for what we could handle, if that makes sense?
12 weeks.
So how much does
yeah.
that have in a day?
It's 12 weeks.
How does that regulation fall on us, and how does any work with like the union, how does that, is there any guidance that we need to consider?
With the union,
Yeah, and like any of that, I mean, that's not,
they've never asked or bargained for this.
okay,
So this would immediately go in the all-employee handbook. I imagine they'd want to incorporate it in their agreement, labor agreement, the next time negotiations come up, so can't just be taken away by the board. You know, it's a little harder to take things away once they're in a union agreement. I guess theoretically they could say, well, we don't think your policy is generous enough, but to me that's a very counterintuitive argument since we just negotiated earlier this year and they didn't even ask for anything regarding paternal leave. So something is infinitely better than the nothing they have. So I can't see them saying, well, we appreciate it, but now we want more. I just think they don't have the leverage to make that case.
So let me go back, and this might not be politically correct. So the reason why I gave two different things, so the childbearing person, that's where I can see 12 weeks. And for a spouse, I don't necessarily see 12 weeks of full pay. I don't see that necessarily for a spouse of 12 weeks of full pay, but in my mind is I don't want differences. I want the partner or spouse to be the same. So again, so that's kind of where I'm backing it to. Okay, let's say 8 weeks of 100% and 4 weeks of 60%. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
again, that's just
It's just,
my thought.
it's very generous. Did Julie I'm sure Julie did research to see what other companies or corporations and what was their levels that they were paying at.
Actually, to
Correctly.
be honest, we didn't do a ton of research on
Okay,
that.
that's fine.
I could tell you what my wife's friends from other
Right,
companies out completely outside of local government or the electric industry have. 12 weeks, just my gut seems extremely generous. Maybe
huge.
not for
that's
parents
huge.
out west, but a family, but,
Right,
you know, in my mind, I was thinking, you know, like that 4 to 6 to 8 week total.
that's what I was thinking too.
But again, we can do that over the next month, if that's an ask the board would like,
So
for our staff.
here's another thing that and again, I'm being biased or whatever, just because my daughter and son-in-law just recently went through this. Can this be divided up? Meaning like, okay, so let's say it is 12 weeks, but,
You're saying 6 now, 6 in the future.
or 8 now and, oh, I'm ready to get back to work, and you get back to work for 2 weeks and you're exhausted or whatever, and you need a little more time to acclimate back into the workforce. Can a percentage be done? I mean, does it have to go all,
Doesn't have to, it
Continuous.
just, I can see, just being here for 11 years, it's gonna get sticky and gray, because it opens up the door for human nature and for someone to kind of know they might have, oh my, okay, maybe going a little trip here or there. I'm just
I'm just
have it
throwing
be-
those.
I know, I'd rather have it just be clean cut, just for ease of implementation, and we don't want this to be a hassle.
Okay.
Again, I think the goal of the policy is really, we don't want, obviously to retract and retain, but we don't want management to be in a tough position if people fully utilize their PTO.
Yeah.
And then they need to take off for some reason in the future and they don't have PTO, and then it's unpaid, not approved, and they're disciplined, even though we don't want to discipline them, but we have to for precedent reasons. The other thing, we want to have people conserve their PTO so they can take that mental breather, which all the data in the world shows is good for employees, you know, to squeeze out the sponge from time to time. But then also, it is advantageous if we didn't have such a policy, again, that retainment, where somebody might say, well, I'm just gonna leave the company. It's better for the collective group to have such a policy, so we don't have to go out and hire somebody new and retrain somebody, and that's a risk in and of itself. So the policy does help. I think the ratepayers, it's just finding that balance where it's not so beneficial to the one employee, and it's a detriment now to the rest of the staff and the ratepayers. It has to be that fine balance. So that's what, I don't know exactly that number, and I'd love to sit down really with the entire office department and get their unsolicited feedback independently of each other, of like, based on your tenure here at Light and Power, how long do you think we could manage with down a person?
So one other question. So is this, when we say 12 weeks, we're not talking, or 8 weeks, or what, we're not, that's
Calendar
including,
weeks.
that's
That's including
including
Saturday, Sunday.
Saturday,
And we
Sunday.
wouldn't get paid, it would be, you know,
Right.
a week is 7-day period, 5 of them are business days.
Right,
Yeah,
well, I just want to make sure that,
yeah,
It'd be the same as 2 weeks vacation,
right,
10 business days.
and we could clarify that, I don't wanna think like, oh, 7 days is a week and a half's worth of business days, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, one question I had is, so if somebody, let's say we have next week's leave, somebody else to take leave, and let's say then, let's say it's like a line worker, and then we have a storm, and that person volunteers to come back for a day to deal with the storm. Does that end their leave, or can they go back, resume their leave, or, you know, how would we deal with that? Because cause I could.
I haven't thought about that, that's something I mean, it even could happen with an office person, maybe we need
Well,
them
yeah,
to work from home under a dire emergency.
Right.
Can you do this special project, or so-and-so got sick while somebody was on vacation and somebody got in a car accident, is there anything you can do? So
yeah.
like,
You have your kid, 3 days later, some massive storm hits, you might come in.
yes,
No.
well, I mean, granted, we didn't have this policy, the week Caroline was born, 2 days after Doug Barnes resigned, I was here, because we didn't have a manager of the department. So, I think you have to probably put in some clause for the atypical, not once in a lifetime, but, extraordinary event.
Yeah.
That doesn't discontinue the leave, that period of time is paid as is, and then you can add, after that, where it almost continues for the appropriate amount of days. I think that's a good call.
So I think it would make sense, 'cause I could see where if someone made the event happen, I could see somebody, if you had like, let's say 4 weeks, right, and you're 2 weeks into your leave, and there's a storm, somebody would say, hey, I'll come back, for a day to deal with this. Because the point of the leave is to be home and kind of bond as a family and to adapt to the new schedule and routine and everything, and taking a day back to work in the middle of that is not gonna throw things off, especially if the person wants to, right? I'm sure they hold on to the volunteer, so I wouldn't want that to interrupt the leave. And I guess it would probably I think you probably could put something in there, where in extreme circumstances, manager can approve pausing the leave and resuming it when,
No, that's a
if
good point.
both sides agree it's necessary, right? So,
Mhm.
Okay. One minute. Jeff is here, at 7:13. Just wanna make sure that that's noted, and, what we're doing right now. So the only thing that you really missed, Jeff, is, a request from the Showboat for a benevolence, and we took their input, and we're gonna put it, we can talk about it later, and we put that on, gonna put that on our November meeting, to figure out if there's anything that the board members wanna do. And then the other is, we had our audit came in, and that was a good to go, clean opinion, highest that you can get, and so that's where we are right now. And what we're doing is with this, if you've had a chance to look at it or anything, what we're doing is, we're just kinda, Steve's goal is to, if you follow the thing, there's been some blanks, is to, fill in the blanks, and then kinda go from there. I don't know if it's consensus, but I know that, I think it is, but Andrew, I think where women, the person giving birth, and then the spouses and partners, I think the board has kind of said, we don't want to separate them, we want to have it across the board type, and policy that, would be, and right now, we're just trying to figure out where we would be, whether 8 weeks, and I've thrown out different numbers, 8 weeks full pay, 4 week, or additional 4 weeks, at 60%. I mean, again, we're just, that's the stage that we're at right now.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, there's two costs, right? There's labor costs for when they're not here and we're paying their wage. And then there's like additional,
In labor costs?
yeah, I'm saying, there's additional like headache that the office gets from being short a staff, potentially 2 staffs if something, I don't know how many first, our amount of people, probably a year, or 1 or 2 a year that someone's having a kid. What, you seem worried about, not so much the labor expense, you seem more worried about the office headache, like the
Yeah,
pressure it puts on everybody else.
Yeah, and it's, how do I say this in the best way possible? I want to talk with, over the next month, the office staff about their concern. We are hiring 2 new people, like, we will be making offers very likely tomorrow. And I've sat in on the vast majority of the interviews. We've had some very good talented candidates, that have some skill sets that may allow us to do more than we have in the past, or for the delegation of work where we haven't been able to in the past. And, you know, I just want to evaluate that in the new talent we'll have here, or the differing skills that we have here, and how that will play into things in our comfort level. But yeah, I'm not overly concerned about the labor costs, because we'd be paying it either way. If somebody's here, we're paying it for their production, now we're paying it for them to be with their families. So it's not any additional money we're incurring that we didn't budget for in the fiscal year, you know, unless we know somebody's gonna be. I'm more concerned about specifically the office not pulling their hair out, or this being the worst 12 weeks of their lives, or 8 weeks, or 6 weeks. So I think everyone in the office would support a policy, because how can't you be happy for your coworker, the family? It's a special time in life. They know that this type of policy just makes it more likely that they'll stay and come back to their job, which is a benefit to the whole group. So I think everybody recognizes the rationale and the benefit of it. But at a point, I mean, for example, if it was a year, everybody would say, can't do it. At 48 weeks, still too long. So as you go down, eventually you're gonna find that sweet spot where everybody says, it's fair to everybody. And that's what I would like to talk with, you know, specifically like Julie, Sharon, Megan, etc.
So the other is, and this, so in order to be eligible, they would have to work here for 2/3 of the year,
1,340 hours.
which divide that by 40, I mean, you're talking about a 40-hour work week, that's 2/3 of the year.
Yes.
I'm just asking, because again, I know, you know, then there's. Right, good.
What does the FMLA currently require for a company of our size?
I believe the number that Anna gave is the FMLA number. I think
So that's
she,
for the 1340 hours
I
thing?
do believe so. I'd have to again ask Anna, but I believe she, you know, mimicked some of this type of language from the FMLA, so we're just not arbitrarily pulling hours out of mid-air.
Well, we need to have maternity leave. I guess I didn't realize that wasn't happening. But I feel that we need to do our homework to see what other people are doing, kind of to see where we're at. What I'll do is tomorrow, I can flip to you my contract, what it says. How many weeks off maternity leave, blah, blah, blah. And let you guys see what Blue Cross Blue Shield hands to the bargaining unit,
Okay,
you know.
they're a little bigger than us, but
Well, yeah, but I'm gonna tell you right now, we don't get 12 weeks. I think we might get 8 weeks. I was never there to have a baby. My baby days were gone and I was in Stream Deck, so.
So I guess what I'm hearing, the final 2 bullets, I'll combine into one. The restrictive language, I'll modify slightly. The repayment, do we want to have that cliff, or are we looking at a more blended approach on that repayment?
I think maybe it's every day you work, you get a day off or something, you know, like I like to have maybe 1-to-1 ratio or 2-to-1 ratio, something like that seems.
So if you're off for 6 weeks, you come back for 6 weeks? I mean, so then it would be, you know, like 1 times the number of days? 1 time?
And so if they were,
If you're off for 3 weeks, you need to come back for 3 weeks.
so if they were gone for 6 weeks and they came back and gave a 2-week notice, they'd have to the idea would be that they'd be refunding 4 weeks of that.
On a blended approach, yes. on the cliff approach, if they did.
In other words, it's just they've gotta stay the next 6 weeks or they don't,
Right,
they gotta get on there.
right, I mean, they just got time off,
Mhm.
fully paid, without any PTO.
So what's,
To not give anything back to the employer after you just got that benefit seems counterintuitive.
So
We're
how
just
does
setting
our-
ourselves out.
so how does our PTO work? So if somebody has saved up their PTO, can they use all their PTO and then at the end of it say, I'm leaving? Like,
I have to make a.
Maybe, I mean, what if it doesn't get approved by the manager?
what the PTO?
Yeah.
Maybe it
But
should be
I'm saying,
longer.
like, what if someone's approved to take a 2-week vacation? And they come back and say, I'm leaving?
Well, with that situation, we would have to pay them out their PTO anyway. It's a liability in our books.
Oh, okay,
So they get 2 less weeks of payout,
yeah.
so we reduced our liability by them taking time off.
Mhm.
Here, we're not,
Right.
because they're not using anything
So
from the
maybe,
bank.
I was thinking maybe the cliff approach might work better, because essentially you don't want someone to go, okay, I get X number of pay for taking 8 weeks, let's just pay it for 8 weeks out of theoretical. And then like, it's some value proposition they're looking at, when can I quit without having to pay all this back? And you don't want that employee anyways. You know, you don't wanna have to deal with that
Yeah.
in or out. They're either coming back to come back for the long term, or they're not coming back, so like, maybe a 1-to-1 ratio isn't a good, or maybe even like the blended or isn't a good approach versus just having a cliff approach.
And that's why I like certainty.
Let's go
We
in.
know
Yeah.
that we're getting them back for this period of time unless they wanna repay us.
I mean,
So
'cause
we
if
can
you-
plan
If
and,
you said, hey, Dana, you can have these 8 weeks, but you're gonna have to work 6 months when you come back to get it back, that eight weeks is like, I don't think I can handle 8 more months at a place I don't wanna be. But if it was like, you know, you can have this 8 weeks, but you only have to work a month when you come back to get it not repaid, I can do that value in my head and say, oh, I can work for a month, you know, when I come back and get all that pay, so. I think that's what you're
Well,
trying to
unless, you
avoid,
know,
is that.
you're a young mother who doesn't really wanna leave her child. You know what I mean? And
Right.
then maybe that equation doesn't come into it, because I think that's a more typical situation. It's not a disgruntled employee who's taken
So
paternity
someone's
leave.
decided,
It's more likely, a young mother who's really doesn't wanna come back to work because she doesn't wanna leave her child.
Yeah.
That's
this
the
is
real
part of the
issue.
retainment, you know? Get
I
them back
understand.
here and,
Yeah,
you know,
I
get them back and
And part of it too is, I mean, so you have these, like right now, again, and why I was asking, can you split it up or anything, so, again, because of COVID, our grandson, they weren't comfortable with, having him go back to daycare, childcare,
Right.
you know, and those things.
Right.
So again, she was taking the 8 weeks, and then, so our son-in-law was taking 4 weeks, then going back to work while she was still 4 weeks when the baby was first born, then the daughter was taking 8 weeks, and then all of a sudden he was back to work, and then taking 4 weeks later, to, again, so that the grandson didn't have to go to childcare with the COVID and everything. So, just so you know, I can get back to it, Family Medical Leave provides certain employees with up to 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected leave per year. It also requires that their group health benefits be maintained during the leave. FMLA is designed to help employees balance their work and family responsibilities by allowing them to take reasonable unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons. FML applies to all public agencies, all public and private, elementary, secondary schools and companies with 50 or more employees. These employers must provide an eligible employee with up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave each year for any of the following reasons, and it lists birth, placement of.
we've already adopted the
Right.
yeah.
FMLA language for
Right.
our utility irrespective of the
Yeah.
50. It's in our personnel handbook.
And so basically that kinda answers my question earlier, basically that is unpaid leave.
Correct.
We're talking paid leave, of course. Okay.
We're just having to
Yep.
determine whether we want paid leave and what those numbers would be.
So if somebody were to choose 12 weeks of FMLA, I mean, they could do that now without this policy, but how would the staff cover that?
Yeah, I don't,
Would that be?
you know, I mean, my gut is, I don't think a lot of people just generally can afford to be gone for that
Right.
quarter of the year with no pay. I'm sure there's an exception, but I don't think a lot of people, once you're living with a salary or a household, depending on that much money, now you introduce a kid, oh, and we're gonna have 3 months of no pay. I think it just ferrets and sorts itself out,
Mhm.
is my thing. I mean, I think just economics works its way.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, the theory being is that if you really needed the help, you'd have to find someone temporary, and that's what you do with money.
Have your pay and take off forever. Why not?
Hmm?
If they're gonna pay you for weeks, you're
Yeah.
gonna take it. 'Cause-
Well, yeah, no, I mean, but I'm saying the unpaid part, that
Yeah.
you're talking about having to deal with,
Maybe you can't
A
stay
lot of
in
us-
the home.
Yeah,
That's me. I love my kids and wife, but I have the edge. You guys pay me to go to my home.
I guess I'm talking about in terms of being without a staff member for a certain amount of time, you have to be at least capable of 12 weeks because they're entitled to that already. It's just, we wouldn't be paying them if they chose to take the FMLA.
Yeah,
Right, then you
So-
actually have.
we'd have the problem, but I just feel like the likelihood is far smaller.
Yeah. I
Nobody's
guess when
able
it comes
work
to,
at home.
you mentioned the percentage up there, I kind of feel like that the leave ought to just be full paid leave like PTO. Like, having a partial paid leave makes it kind of,
Well, that incentivizes them to come back.
Exactly.
And that makes a lot of sense.
PTO to make themselves whole,
Yeah.
or.
I mean,
Oh,
what's
okay.
the, if we take a big
that,
picture.
well, that's why I'm saying if we take a, whatever X number of weeks we choose, just make it full-time, like, so they get full pay for the whatever weeks, but then that's it, not just, well, you can take 2 weeks full-time and then 2 weeks at halftime, and, or, I don't know, whatever different things, I think, typically I just, from what I've seen is that it's just, you have this time, and it's not like a, you're gonna be paid 50% while you're out.
This
Cause
is
then it's just, then there's, it's gonna make them think, well, I'll just come back to work because I need the money, and I don't think that's the right.
That's why I went back to work after I had the kids.
I think
I
that's
don't
a
think
pretty
that's
good
the-
motivator.
I don't think that's the
Yeah.
intention of
Money.
leave, is to say, well,
Well,
you can be gone, but we're not gonna pay you very much.
I did.
Well,
Yeah,
let's stay home and spend more time with the kids,
No,
let's
I
sleep.
did, that was
Doesn't
not the
work
deal.
out.
I mean, workers' comp and disability don't pay 100%.
Right, unemployment doesn't. You know, I mean, they're, if we take a step back and get a high level view, are we implementing this policy to solve a problem that we have currently?
You missed this part of the conversation.
Yeah, I did. I apologize for being late.
No,
Oh,
You're fine.
Couple reasons I feel this policy is important to attract and retain employees. We talked about if somebody does have a child, it is likely under today's setup, they would exhaust most, if not all of their PTO being off, and they would come back with none. From a mental health, giving the employee a break perspective, it doesn't give them the chance through the remainder of the fiscal year to just take a break, which is good for production and just take a breather. And then also, what happens if employee ABC, a 7-year employee has a child August 1. They use all their PTO by mid-September, they come back, they need to be off. Well, it's unpaid, not approved. That puts management in a tough position because we have other employees who have unpaid, unapproved time off where they've been disciplined. And they feel that they were off for a darn good reason for the unpaid, unapproved time off, but they got disciplined. Well, what if they compare, well, why this person who had a child, can they be unpaid and approved with no discipline? And then it just becomes sticky. So I think we're trying to, you know, there is no problem, but I think it's good to kind of see what's around the bend and put policies in place so we don't have to after the fact or if something comes up. But I think we want to keep it balanced to the ratepayers and company and the current employees, but also attract and retain that person and make sure they're not completely out of PTO. Where they come back and it's just a good benefit to have. Why do you have a retirement package? You don't need it, but if you don't have it, you're not gonna be able to attract great employees the majority of the time. So it's just another thing in your suite of offerings to retain or attract employees.
I guess I kind of see it as, if we're gonna offer this leave, we should want employees to take it if they earn it, right? So if they have a kid, then we should expect them to take all the leave we give them. That's kind of the intent of the leave, right? Just that we're saying it's good for them, it's good for the company, so they should use it. And that's why I think putting some kind of percentage on it kind of defeats that purpose, right? It'd be kind of like saying, you can have PTO, but we're only gonna pay 80% when you're off. Well, no one's gonna take vacation, right? Or we'll take less anyway, because they don't wanna lose the money. And I don't think we wanna put that on someone if they're gonna have a kid that says, well, I'd like to stay this whole X number of weeks off, but I really need some more money, so I'm gonna have to cut it short and come back. Well, now, they're gonna feel a little more stressed, and they're not gonna have as enjoyable leave as they could have had, so I kind of feel like if we're gonna give them leave, make it full paid, so that they can have that leave and then come back to work. And if that means we say it's a few weeks less than it could have been, because we could have had a longer leave that was partial paid, I'd rather have a shorter leave that's full paid. Just so that the time that they have off, they're not worrying, and they're getting the benefit of the leave, so when they do come back, they're ready to work.
I think if you're looking to retain talent, it's important to get an idea of what other people are doing around here. You know, if it's something that we're looking to say, hey, this is one of the benefits provided when you sign up to work here. It makes sense for us to get a little bit of an idea of what are we competing against. You know, right now we have Colorado, which is, it's a different world, you know, it's a different world.
You
Bring
know,
your dog to work, it's wonderful, but it's a different world.
It is a different world, but it is the world that these young kids are living in, what
is.
was brought to Perry's plate, because we just lost a great worker at Blue Cross Blue Shield. She had to resign because she couldn't stay home with her kids, she couldn't work from home. And she was an amazing worker, and Blue Cross Blue Shield wouldn't bend and let her work from home. So she went somewhere else.
Okay, so do you have, I wanna move forward.
yeah,
So
I think I
this-
what I'll do is I'll clean it up a little bit, we'll do some research, we'll talk with staff, and we'll bring back to the board, you know, I'm gonna have Anna solicit other governmental entities, utilities, what if anything are they doing, even just the private sector, kind of just what's the norm in the industry today. Any of you do have a policy,
I'll flip it
the
to you
two of
tomorrow.
you, I would love to see it, I think that'd be helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
I have friends that work at businesses too, and, you know, I can be transparent, this is an accounting firm, but this is what people out there are seeing or getting.
Right.
And, there's a lot of our office staff, even though we're an electric utility, their skill set, they could probably work, you know, at a Spectrum Health and, you know, accounting or finance, or they could go work for somebody else in customer service. So it might be a different industry, but at least for, you know, the people who are, the typical worker who's gonna have a child here, you know, it may still be good to look at other places besides just electric utilities, because there's still sense to bring them somewhere else. So, all right.
I have one quick question, Paul. So, back in our medical, can our employees, so let's say X employee is run out of PTO time, and a particular employee has 40 days of PTO built up, can they give X amount to a fellow employee?
We do have a
We do.
donation policy. I would have to review, we wrote, that was like a really good detailed policy.
Right.
I'd have to look back and see
I thought we did, but I
how,
wasn't,
how somebody could donate, or
Right.
and what it could be used for, so I can bring back that information too.
I was just, because it kind of all falls into this. Okay. What, when, okay, just because we're bringing it back, when do you anticipate your last board meeting?
Next month,
Okay,
yeah, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, so I'd love to have all these things wrapped, I mean, there's a lot I'd love to get wrapped up that Charlie can have to take home for me, so. But this is one of the things that, for him to get caught in the middle of, just seems like a real hassle. So if we could wrap this up next month, that'd be great.
okay,
Next item, last month, we talked about a generation department standby pay policy. Currently, our combustion turbines are registered within MISO for capacity credit, and if there are MISO max gen alerts or events, we are legally bound by contract to operate our combustion turbines. That would really mean, because of our small staff, Casey coming in, and if Tom's available, Tom, and we, need to implement cross-training measures, so it's not just Tom as like that backup person, maybe it's a standby guy, or maybe it's the leadership in the distribution department, so the two crew leaders and Ryan. But really, the need for this policy came up because it is such a small department. We are obligated to run during a MISO event, which could happen outside of hours. And as I'll talk about in a minute, over the last 5.5, 6 years, Casey's done some research. There is the opportunity to make money, based on historical data outside of the normal working hours. And we looked at it from this perspective. How many hours in a year can we run the combustion turbines outside of your typical business hours for up to 3 consecutive hours and profit at least $100 an hour or $200 an hour? And that's after all expenses. Consumables, fuel, wages, the benefits in this policy, etc. And, at $65 an hour, it translates into $100 of net profit per hour for the department. So after expenses, we've left, over $6+ thousand on the table. At $80 a megawatt hour, we're losing $200 of net profit approximately on the table. So we have times during the year outside of normal working hours. And again, our normal working hours are typically the times of year where the prices are the hottest, because that 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the summer, that's when load's really high, it's really hot, air conditioning and HVAC's being used, and we're here anyway. So again, these hour counts are outside of your normal Monday through Friday working type hours. So how do you put a policy in place, considering we are obligated to run during MISO events? There's money on the table to potentially be made for Lowell Light Power, and as it stands today, we could kind of rake Casey and Tom over the coals and say, well, we just need you to come in at any which day or time for no additional compensation, and Lowell Light Power is going to essentially profit. So how do you put something in place where Lowell Light and Power benefits, your limited staff that we really want to retain also benefits and feels fair about coming in? We pay standby and on-call pay for the distribution department when there's an outage. Lowell Light Power needs that power back on for the benefit of the ratepayer, and we pay a hefty sum to make sure we have staff available to do that for the ratepayers. How can we do that for the generation department? So that's really the intent. And we really tried to define the purpose. And again, we use board, not putting words in your mouth, but just as a, just so somebody's reading this, like, why in the heck are we drafting this? So I'll read it verbatim. The Lowell Light and Power Board recognizes that the profitable and/or MISO mandated operation of the generation department's generation equipment is dependent on numerous variables that are primarily outside of staff's control, including but not limited to the weather, natural gas prices, and LMP market prices. As such, it is difficult to project when and/or how often Lowell Light and Power's generation equipment can be economically operated. To ensure the economic operation of the department to fairly compensate staff, it is critical to define operating expectations and guidelines. This policy should be reviewed from time to time as needed, based on major changes in staffing levels, operating costs, equipment status, or variables outside of Lowell Light and Power's control. So, what we're proposing, by we, it's really me, but I've collaborated with Casey and we've met multiple times, is a $150 per week, bi-weekly standby pay. So that amounts to $3,900 per year. For perspective, in the distribution department for on-call, we pay $35,000 to $40,000 a year. So you're talking 1/10 approximately the standby pay than the distribution department. But again, the frequency of these events are smaller, you have a longer time to respond, you're working indoors compared to outside, so there's a number of factors, but I just want to give perspective of, $3,900 compared to almost 10x in the distribution department, so it's not like we don't pay significant on-call. So we define what significant profit compensation is, and it's the amount of electric energy profit based compensation will be based per hour. It shall be calculated by multiplying 20% by the profit with a maximum cap of $75 per hour. So the intent here is to compensate the employee as well for a percentage of the profit that they do make, up to 20%. If that
So
makes
that
sense.
incentivizes running
Running the units.
Yep.
And we put a kind of a guideline of the number of hours that we could run a year, 100 non-typical. And again, you have to pick some number that's fair. If you're only running 3 or 4 hours at a time, that could be multiple times a month if that employee's working pre-work or post hours. And they're, this policy says they have to now. Like if there's money to be made on the table, they're coming in and doing. So how can we incentivize the person to be here, feel good about being here, compensate them fairly, and then even if we hit the 100 hours, because we have this compensation structure in place, they want to be here more than that 100 hours. We have some exceptions. If the 100-hour limit is reached and a MISO event occurs, they have to be here. And if an atypical or irregular event, such as a polar vortex that causes sustained elevated LMP market prices, the determination will be made on a case-by-case basis by the general manager. My concern was, what if we had a week straight and power prices are through the roof?
Right.
I told Casey, it won't be fun, but ultimately we work for the ratepayer. We have to be here to capture as much value from those units as we can during those times. Again, they're very atypical, but there's kind of that exception in here. Again, the continuous running for an employee 16 hours, and that's in line with how long a distribution department employee can work. I think I skipped over some stuff up here. We define what operation is, and I'll let you read that for yourself. So
who decides when we are gonna make enough profit to run?
it's a formula.
So it has to be at least $200 in profit.
So we define that in here. So netting at least $200 per hour for at least 3 consecutive hours, or at least $600 in one continuous run to find significant profit.
But I guess, so,
We know how much we're gonna make.
right, but I guess what I'm saying is, so if we know we're gonna make that much, is it automatic that we run? Or is that, like the general manager's call that says, you know, I think this time we don't need to run, or, I don't know, I guess, is it? So if there's like if there's a computer program that says, hey, today we're gonna make $600, does that mean automatically that Casey has to go in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I wondered how, that's a good question, thank
It
you.
is, it's really, we know the, you know, with close proximity to the cost of gas per MCF, we know what our consumable cost is, we know what our wage cost is, we know what our maximum exposure is in terms of paying out an extra 20% up to $75, so we know all of our expenses. Well, if the price per megawatt hour is gonna be this, and we know how many we can produce at this temperature, we'll know going in at this price point or higher, we're gonna be making this much money.
I just wanted to make sure it was, that it wasn't like someone's decision that says, so, well, today we're gonna make, we can
No,
make
it's-
$700 today, but we're deciding we don't need it this time.
No,
So
but
it's
the
just-
intent is, when we can make significant profit, that's the trigger to be
Okay.
here and make money. Does that make sense?
Yep. No, I just wanted to clarify that, because I think that is, I like that better, that it's just when we make this much, we're going in the run, that it's not somebody's call to,
Right, and if
Yeah.
we,
for that profit part of it.
the other thing you have to recognize is, there's yeah, there's an inconvenience that you're compensating an employee for to be on standby. That they have to be nearby or available or coherent. So,
Yeah.
no, you're like, well, you might pay $3,900 in a year to maybe never run. Well, we don't know going into the year if a MISO event's gonna happen, or if we could make a bunch of money. But that person has to be there and ready. I mean, just like
Yeah,
if you wanna reserve a standby generator, you wanna have that there for you, or have an attorney on retainer. So,
How does this work with vacations and things like that? I mean,
that's where we have to cross-train.
okay, so if Casey takes a vacation away from the area, then
You know, it would,
the.
again,
compensation would
this
go to-
is gonna be like a fluid situation. I see Casey and Tom as like the 2 point people. Like, Casey's the point guy, and it would be Casey's call, but if Tom could get to the point of being comfortable, even if he's part-time, again, these are pretty atypical events, he would be the next guy, and somebody else would be the guy behind Tom. But you can take your unit, offline. You can't just do it willy-nilly for the heck of it. It has to be a legitimate reason. If you don't have the staffing, or they're on vacation, or you're at a conference, you can take it offline. But you just don't do it, I mean, otherwise, why don't we just do it all year? You know, eventually, they're gonna change the rules of capacity if people are abusing that all the time.
Right.
So,
So one thought I had, or was that if the employee's compensation is based on the profit we're making? I mean,
Up to a certain amount.
Right. I kind of feel like it'd be more fair just to leave it as a flat rate, or something like X times their hourly rate, or what if 1 times, or, you know. Because it'd be kind of unfortunate, fairly, I mean, they have to come in either way, whether we're making $1 million or $600, they're there. And so, it seems like it's not fair to them to say, well, you're gonna have to work, 4 hours now, but you're only gonna be paid a little bit, so we're not making much, but you have to come in anyway.
When they do come in, it counts towards their hours worked in the pay period, so there is some advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So, you see what I'm saying?
So you're saying they get both? They get that, that significant profit compensation plus the comp hours?
Not comp hours, it's really, they need to work 80 hours in a pay period, so if they come in for 4 hours at night, it counts for their 80. So if you wanna call them comp,
Oh,
That's
it's
fine.
yeah, so
it's effectively
it's kind of like comp, but I see.
kinda like that,
you're-
right?
so, if if the generation never ran at all, it's costing us $7,800 a year.
No, we're hourly employees are not impacted by this. Only Big Casey.
But if we cross-train people,
But-
I mean.
So only Casey gets a standby pay. Well, what about if he's
So
on
why-
vacation
so
and
Mike-
Tom is,
What?
so what if he's on vacation and Tom is like then the point person?
He'd get paid his hourly rate times overtime.
But he would not get any,
And a portion of the significant profit.
I'd like to see us define who's available for the standby, like, do they have to get certified to be a point, you know, for future reference, when we do cross-train somebody, I'd like to see a definition of, when we've identified you as a person that can be point, you know, and either Casey or Tom, or, you know, the person in charge are out on vacation or something, you get that standby pay for that time, or, you know, something to that effect, I think is maybe kind of
Sure.
forward-looking, but good to put in there.
Well, the distribution department, always has somebody on standby.
One
Is it
person.
scheduled?
Yeah, it is.
So they schedule it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not.
We need a number of
But they're
people
all
that
paid.
can be the backup to Casey. Just like,
Right.
with the distribution department, I guess theoretically you're taking the chance that all of the hourly other people not on standby are unavailable. But it always works itself out when you have one guy on standby and 6 other people. Some hourly person, even though they're not getting paid the standby rate, they know it's worth their while to come in and get time and a half or double time,
Right.
because they like the extra money. So you need enough people behind Casey cross-trained to be that second person.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And that comes,
For now, it's just Casey,
so
probably will always be just Casey.
So I have a problem with that. And here's my problem, my scenario. Because I'm listening to Casey, we have to have 2 people at when they're running,
On site, yeah.
on site. So you literally have to have,
with the distribution department, if you're working on primary or in a bucket, you have to have 2 people. And we know it. It's no difference. A lot of the work that we have for storms or outages, more than 50%, you might need 2 people.
but there's only one person that's on standby?
Yeah, because you need one person to go out to evaluate and then call in
Yeah,
the others.
and there might be a time where you can't, per OSHA, do the work.
So I guess I'm looking, so part of being on standby is you have to be, I mean, you can be home, but you gotta be sober. I mean, you can't be, you know, having 3 drinks at dinner or, you know, or whatever the case may be. So I look at it that you have to have if 2 people have to be there to run it, you have to have 2 people on standby. Because they have to be sober, they've gotta be, you know, it impacts your life, your home life, if you know that you've got to be available. I mean, it's kinda like, I don't know, it's kinda like when I'm on rescue. If you were on rescue, you know, and you had to have 2 people, I mean, so again, I'm just saying, in my mind, you have to have 2 people on standby.
Just for generation?
Yeah,
So right now, how,
because,
I mean, Casey and I were the ones to develop this,
right,
and he didn't,
but
but the second person is there just as a safety backup, that's my understanding.
Or to
I
pull on
understand.
they're doing things and taking
Or doing-
reads, but
Or doing other work while they're there serving as a
safety is a huge reason, and Casey's on the phone, so he can chime in, but again, we wanna have Tom, Ryan, Zach, Mark,
Right.
or whoever
So
Casey
yes.
trusts.
So the way it works for distribution right now is so that one person's on call. If something happens, that person who's on call, they're the ones that have to come figure out what it is. If a second person is needed, then
Start calling.
you find somebody from our pool who's available and is ready to work and comes in.
Yes.
And so
So
that's,
that's time and a half.
right, so that's
So we
where,
have 2-hour overtime minimum.
yeah, so then that's where I think the generation, something that would be a similar thing. You got one person who's in standby, so we gotta run, all right, and you gotta call from our pool come in with this person who's on standby.
And that's why we need
Except
to
that in the
develop and
generation
cross-train the
case-
pool. Because eventually, again,
I see
economics works out, like,
And I see what Perry's getting at, is that in the
$2
generation case.
today.
So you got,
Yeah, in the generation case, you always have to have the second person, you don't always have to in distribution, but most of the time distribution you do anyway, so it's the same basic process.
but again, in my mind, is,
One person can't get those generators going?
could.
One person
But
can,
for Casey and Tom feel strongly that just for safety, we should have two people
but,
there.
yeah, because if somebody gets
I'm just
zapped
going
or
by,
in a closed space or something crazy could happen.
If somebody has a seizure, or
Yeah.
you know, the generator's running and all this gas, or
So-
somebody slips, hits their head, or.
again, I'm looking at, we're a very small company, and so how many people are you gonna cross-train for to do that? Because I'm thinking of, okay, you got Casey, or let's say Casey's on big, so, to me, all of a sudden, you need 5, 6, 7 people cross-trained, because you're going down and you're going, I'm sitting around the bonfire and I just had, not,
The other thing let's recognize is the vast majority of the time, power prices do not spike on the weekends. They don't. Like, Casey, you chime in and back me up. It's just, you do not have the industry load or the commercial load. Our load is 30 to 35% lower on Saturday and Sunday. So again, you have to play the odds, and right now, we're leaving a lot on the table. Does this have downfalls, maybe pinhole risks? Sure, but it gets us a lot closer to making money in the future outside of working hours than we are today.
and,
Although the MISO events can happen anytime, right?
They could.
and what kind of, again, I guess I'm also looking at, trying to compare it. So, the distribution, they have to be within 30 minutes. What kind of time frame?
4 hours.
4 hours, okay, so that
On a
makes a little
MISO
difference.
event, a MISO event is 4. Now, prices are gonna be high. We would hone in on that based on the day ahead price and plan schedules around that. And, you know, if the day ahead price is trending higher, then you know you're likely gonna have a higher real-time price of power.
When you say for 3 hours, $200 for 3 hour continuous run.
So $600.
Okay, can you explain to me, we're basing that on knowing the day ahead price and then just watching the market? I mean, how do you know that it's gonna last for 3 hours? What
The
allows
day
you
ahead
to?
they have day ahead prices for every hour for the entire next day.
So
So
you're,
you know
you're
which
basing it on a good estimate?
Yes.
Gotcha, okay.
Now, the real time could be different, but, you know,
Yeah.
when you see high day ahead prices, you know it's gonna be a high demand period, the greater the likelihood of being high real time. So if we see day ahead prices at 90, $100, well, we're pretty sure they're gonna come in there, and even if they come in 20, 25% lower, they're at $65, $70.
Yeah.
Casey, chime in with any and all thoughts, as you helped me write this. I feel like I'm butchering it.
No, you're doing good. Couple things to kind of, I guess, detail, or just kind of add some details to here. Kind of two different modes of operation that we're trying to capture in this one policy. The one mode of operation is the MISO event and our contractual requirements to operate during a max gen event. These are very rare in nature. I think I've only seen one since I've been here. And with that, that's kind of structured it so that the bi-weekly on-call pay is kind of for that, where, could happen at any time. It could be independent of time of day or season, weekday, weekend. Could be, something completely out of our control, big national grid thing, related issue.